Hi again, thanks for being with us. So it's been 1 year now since Russian planes first started hitting targets in Syria. Since then, Moscow's anti-terrorist air campaigns had considerable success in turning the tide in the war.
The U.S. policy in Syria.
Syria is a mess. It's not going to be solved easily.
Понимаете теперь, чего вы натворили?
Russian jets hit over 200 terror targets in eastern and northern Syria just over the weekend.
Some members of the international community continue to accuse Moscow of attacking the Syrian opposition forces and civilians.
Russia continues to support the Syrian president, regardless of the criticism.
US-Russian talks produced results. Договоры нужно срочно возобновлять, продолжая работу со всеми за исключением сирийскими сторонами.
So, the offensive began on the 30th of September 2015 after an official request by the Syrian government. Since then, around 30,000 targets have been hit by the Russian military, killing almost 5,000 terrorists. Thousands of missions have been carried out, many of which helped to bring some 1,500 tons of humanitarian aid to civilians in war-torn areas. Lord Gaziev next looks at Russia's 12 months in Syria.
This is by accident that we're in Palmyra. The Russian military considers it the crowning jewel of their operation here in Syria. It's on this stage, just behind me, that ISIS staged one of its worst massacres. It forced children to execute prisoners of war, captured Syrian troops. It forced the locals of Palmyra to watch the entire sick spectacle, after which the undesirables among them were executed. ISIS bombed, detonated the various ruins here, 2,000-year-old temples and columns and buildings dating back to the times of the Romans. And they were only stopped when the Syrian military, backed by the Russian Air Force, forced them out.
When ISIL militants seized the city, they took the government workers, beheaded them, and left their corpses on the street. Then they started to destroy the antiquities.
Russian engineers have done a great job with mine clearing. If it wasn't for them, the whole city and all of its residents would have been turned to ash.
1 year ago, jihadists were dominant on almost every front, but that's changed. Over the last year, they've been beaten back in Latakia, forced out of their strongholds around the capital, beaten back in Aleppo, and the fighting is brutal. I've been to many of the places where this war is raging, and it isn't pretty. Civilians are dying. There's no denying it. However, the blame game is in full swing. The United States maintains that it's Russia that is causing the majority of civilian casualties, and the media has jumped onto that bandwagon.
At least 200 civilians have been killed in Russian airstrikes in Syria.
Indiscriminately bombing a civilian area. Russian jets are responsible for the strikes.
Dozens of civilian casualties
killed countless civilians. The United States made clear from the onset that they didn't want the Russians here. They didn't want this operation. The difference is the Russians were invited to Syria by the Syrian government. The United States-led coalition invited itself there. The United States has made clear who their favorite sides in this civil war are.
Russia's foreign ministers insisted earlier that Russia is taking every possible measure to avoid civilian casualties and is ready to investigate every single incident. Sergei Lavrov.
We take all necessary precautions not to hit civilians. If this happens, well, we are very sorry, but we need to investigate each and every accusation.
Okay, that's Sergei Lavrov thing just a bit earlier. Now, delighted to say we're joined in cross live to James Carden, the former advisor to the US State Department on Russia, with his thoughts and take stock 1 year on after Russia went in. Hi there, thanks for making the time to be with us and hanging around there online as you've been for a couple of minutes now. How have you viewed Russia's influence on the war in Syria so far? Has it been a positive thing in this whole mess?
Well, it hasn't been an unalloyed good. Permit me to inject a note of caution here. I think that it's probably not a coincidence that the previous segment focused on the Russian success in Palmyra, which was indeed one of the successes in driving out ISIS from there. And there have been some gains on the ground made. I wonder, however, if the Russian Federation may regret all of this in the end, if the cost was worth the price in international condemnation to its reputation, and whether or not there'll be some blowback to the civilian casualties that have been inflicted. And after all, as you and your viewers are well aware, Russia has a population of roughly 25 million Muslim citizens. So, it was laudable to stand up in the fight against ISIS. I simply wonder whether or not, in the long run, the cost will be worthwhile.
Well, what about let's switch it around as far as America's concerned. It's had a number of mishaps there before Russia, in fact, went in. It didn't seem to be doing very much at all with regards to ISIL. ISIL was getting closer and closer to Damascus, been driven right back. Now, Palmyra was totally wrecked. What was America doing up until the time Russia went in? It appeared on the face of it, certainly sitting here, not that much. And separating these moderate terrorists, we keep going on about this ad infinitum, but this is the catch even up to this day.
Well, sure. Well, if you're under the impression that I am a fan of the American intervention in Syria, you'd be mistaken. I don't think that we have a fight there, and there's certainly a case to be made that the Russian intervention, as destructive as it has been, is also legal under international law since they were actually invited there by the Assad government. I don't think or support the American quote-unquote train and equip programs that have been working at cross purposes there. The Syrian civil war, we need to remember, started out as an internal conflict. It's a civil war that has unnecessarily become internationalized, and I think that is the real tragedy. And I think that what Russia and the United States need to get back to is what they started on September 9th with the ceasefire agreements. And as difficult as it is now to envision them coming together again, and that's really, it seems to me, the only way out. And that a military solution is simply not viable at this time.
We heard from Sergei Lavrov his latest thoughts about what, as far as Washington's plan here is, that they're kind of siding with the al-Nusra Front. Maybe they're seeing them as people to come in and take over. They're secretly supporting them so they could take over if Assad is finally pushed from power. Do you buy that?
Well, I understand the suspicion, and as it happens, so does Secretary of State John Kerry. Yesterday, he spoke in Washington, and he said quite plainly that part of the reason for all this mistrust between the two countries is the widespread perception that the United States is not serious about fighting al-Nusra. I wish it would get more serious about fighting al-Nusra, and I think that there are legitimate questions about whether or not the weapons that have been funneled through our quote-unquote allies, who I don't view as allies at all, in Saudi Arabia
and Qatar have been funneling into the Syrian conflict. So again, there's a great gulf of mistrust that needs to be bridged in order for this conflict to come to an end.
James, we've got to leave it there. We've got some adverts to hit around the world. But thank you very much for your time. I'm sure a lot of people would agree with you. Very cool head there. James W. Carden, former advisor of the State Department on Russia. Hope we can see you again on the program, sir. Thank you.